story of Ohio's native tribes was one of resilience, betrayal, and loss. When the United States was in its infancy, it promised peace and fairness to the native peoples of the Ohio region. However, behind those promises was the ambitions of a young nation to expand westward, no matter the cost. Now, follow me. Though many treaties in the Ohio region were negotiated under the appearance of good faith, promising protection, land rights, and peace, the U.S. government constantly wrote in ambiguous language and set contingencies based on European-based bias of the native population within the wording of their treaties. This vague language allowed the U.S. government to justify a legal avenue towards expansion and relocation. This pattern of negotiations illustrated a broader, ingrained bias towards Native Americans that prioritized expansion and control over justice and respect for Indigenous cultures. This repeated violation of treaties highlights the failure of a young nation to achieve its legal, ethical, and social responsibilities, which ultimately led to the removal of Ohio's native tribe. This removal is sometimes referred to as the Other Trail of Tears, and this is their story. In 1787, the Northwest Ordinance laid the foundation for U.S. control over the Ohio Territory. It promised respect for native lands, stating that property and liberty would never be taken away without consent. But the language was riddled with ambiguity. Just and lawful war, and laws founded in justice, would later be twisted to justify the taking of native lands. The language in this and other treaties to follow between the U.S. government and the Indigenous tribes often contained deliberately vague language that would allow for open interpretation later, as a means of tricky violation of established agreements. For the tribes of Ohio, the Shawnee, the Miami, the Delaware, and others, this was the beginning of a slow and calculated relocation. The utmost good faith shall always be observed towards the Indians. Their lands and property shall never be taken away from them without their consent, and in their property, rights and liberty that shall never be invaded or disturbed, unless in just and lawful wars authorized by Congress. But laws founded in justice and humanity shall, from time to time, be made for preventing wrongs being done to them, and for preserving peace and friendship with them. In 1794, after the U.S. victory at the Battle of Fallen Timbers, General Anthony Wayne forced the tribes to a negotiating table. The Treaty of Greenville, signed in 1795, ceded most of Ohio to the U.S., leaving the tribes confined to a small corner of the territory.
The Treaty of Greenville is a massive canvas that is 23 feet from side to side, and along with its frame, weighs 1,800 pounds. The painting depicts the signing of the Treaty of Greenville, an event that can truly be considered the beginning of modern Ohio history. When this treaty was signed, it ended hostilities between the new American nation and the native peoples who had long lived in this area. The treaty opened this portion of the Northwest Territory to exploration and settlement, and led to the admission of Ohio as the 17th state in 1803.
Little Turtle, a Miami leader, initially led successful resistance against U.S. forces, but after his defeat at the Battle of Fallen Timbers in 1794, he advocated for peace. He then accepted the Treaty of Greenville. Tecumseh, the Shawnee leader, strongly opposed the treaty and refused to recognize or sign it. He believed land could not be sold without the agreement of all the tribes, and worked to unite native nations against the U.S.'s expansion. His resistance led to conflicts like the Battle of Tippecanoe in 1811, and his alliance with the British in the War of 1812. In 1811, U.S. military forces attacked and destroyed Provincetown. 2 years later, Tecumseh was killed in the Battle of the Fame. His death marked the end of organized native resistance in Ohio. Henry Crockett was a Tennessee senator who opposed Andrew Jackson and the Indian Removal Act. He saw how the United States government treated Native Americans despite their courage, dignity, and respect for their land. Though being widely contested, the Indian Removal Act passed in the House by a slim vote of 102 to 97. The language of the time painted native peoples as an obstacle to progress, legitimizing the violence and broken promises that followed. The U.S. government's legal and political system were built upon European ideas that disregarded the sovereignty, governance, and culture of native nations. Washington, Jefferson, and other key leaders viewed Native Americans as obstacles to progress, perpetuating policies that dehumanized, and sought to control indigenous peoples rather than honor their legal and cultural rights. The assimilation policies endorsed by figures like Thomas Jefferson, which aimed to transform Native Americans into European-style farmers, reflect an ideological bias that Native Americans were inferior and in need of European guidance to civilize them, further diminishing their autonomy. While Thomas Jefferson's excavation of burial mounds earned him the title of Father of American Archaeology, his observations and manner of authority in his research were condescending at best, and often indicated he looked at these findings with a sense of ownership and superiority. While George Washington took great effort to stay impartial, his prior experience as a surveyor and land speculator may have influenced his policies towards the native tribes, prioritizing western expansion. In 1831, the Shawnee were forced to leave Ohio under the Treaty of Louisville. The Wyandotte followed in 1842, becoming the last native tribe to leave Ohio. The promises of the Northwest Ordinance, the Treaty of Greenville, and countless other agreements were broken, leaving Ohio's native tribes with nothing. The story of Ohio's native tribes is not just a tale of broken treaties, it's a reminder of the cost of expansion. It's a history of a nation failing to honor its word and prioritizing progress over justice. Through this exploration of the broken treaties, the U.S. government's failure to act in good faith in treaty negotiations with Ohio's native tribes was rooted in a biased colonial mindset that saw Native Americans as obstacles to be controlled, rather than sovereign peoples deserving of respect and right. These attitudes did not easily fade. In Charles A. Kent's The Treaty of Greenville, August 3, 1795, a school principal from Illinois wrote in his book in 1919, "But no permanent safety could be guaranteed citizens who moved thither until and unless the savages are exterminated, driven out, or bargained with." His account of the interaction, treaties, and disposition of the native people of the Ohio Valley region is entrenched in beliefs that they were treacherous and ignorant. The systematic challenges that many native communities face today are a result of these long-term biases. These enduring consequences include high rates of poverty, limited access to quality healthcare and education. The erosion of cultural heritage and language also contributes to quality of living issues in their communities. The forced displacement from ancestral lands disrupted traditional ways of life, while the legacy of broken treaties fostered deep, long-standing mistrust towards government institutions for good reason. This intergenerational trauma, rooted in historical injustices, continues to affect the social, economic, and mental well-being of Native people, underscoring the need for meaningful reconciliation and restorative justice.
The Great Council State Park is an example of government-to-government conversations between the state government of Ohio and tribal nations. Governor DeWine, First Lady Fran DeWine, Ohio History Connection, as well as Ohio Department of Natural Resources are a real example on how to do the job right of conducting government-to-government conversations with tribal nations. They're to be commended. We've had visits from the Ohio Department of Natural Resources, and we've had frequent visits with the Ohio History Connection. So those relationships are continuing to develop and become more fruitful. This is one example. World Heritage Site for the Hopewell Ceremonial Group is another, and we're just happy to be here today.